What is going on, everybody? So, if you saw recently, I released my video for the most disappointing films of the year so far. And I guess you could bucket this into that category because these are the worst movies I've watched this year so far. And these are movies that I didn't necessarily have high expectations for, but that were just a complete and total waste of time. And as I said before, I don't like dogging on people for making movies because I know how hard it is to make movies. I went to school for film production. There's a lot of time and effort and energy put into making movies, but there are certain movies out there that just make you feel like you have completely and totally wasted your time. And those are the movies that irritate me the most. And so today I'm going to talk about the 10 worst movies I've watched of the year so far. These were all released in 2024, all new release movies, and most of them are probably going to be in one genre, if you can expect that. I watch a lot of horror movies, so there are a lot of horror movies on this list. And so, without further ado, let's get into the 10 worst movies I've seen this year so far. Coming in at number 10 is the film Baghead. This is a Shudder original movie that felt like a rip-off of the film Talk to Me, but instead of using a hand, they used a creature, and it was far less interesting. This movie was an hour and a half, and it felt like it was 3 hours long. It had laughable performances, a couple of moments that I felt like were genuinely creepy, but mostly it was just padded runtime with a lot of jump scares, with a story that was incredibly predictable. I was like, oh man, I know exactly the direction that this film is going to go, and it went exactly in that direction. And it's just one of those movies that by the end of it, I was like, wow, I really felt like I wasted my time. And Shudder puts out a lot of terrible original films, and you can just bucket this one right in there with some of the worst. Coming in at number 9 is the film Arcadian, starring Nicolas Cage. This is one of Nicolas Cage's movies that he was thrown in there solely to draw in viewership. He's not in the entire runtime, and it shows. Most of the movie following these two brothers who the performances are both fine, but this is like the most generic, beat by beat, can guess every single moment that this movie is going to go in. They introduce all of these new characters towards like the halfway point of this movie that really add nothing to the film. There were like 3 different times I felt like this movie should have been over. A lot of people thought the creature design on this was really cool. I thought that the CGI was really bad. There were a couple of moments where you could kind of see how shaky the characters were added into the software, and it just didn't look very good. And yeah, this just kind of felt like a Quiet Place ripoff in a lot of moments, and I did not enjoy it. I found it to be really bland and boring. And there are a lot of movies in this genre, like creature feature wise, that are way better and more worth your time than this one. Up next is the film Night Swim, coming in at number 8, which honestly, I won't lie to you, had some incredibly enjoyable schlocky moments that made me laugh really hard. It never totally fell into that so bad it's good territory, but like a haunted swimming pool, you knew you were going to get some great one-liners, especially the Marco Polo stuff. I was just losing my mind at how ridiculously stupid it was. It never creeped me out. I never felt like there was a single moment in this movie that was genuinely scary. It was way too long. It felt really bloated for a very run-of-the-mill horror film. And I don't know, I was disappointed because I was expecting this to be bad, but I was hoping that it was so bad it was good. And there are moments that I do think this movie is worth watching because of how laughably bad they are, but it never gets totally in to that so bad it's good territory for me to tell you that it's worth wasting your time watching this movie at all. Coming in at number 7 is the film Tarot. I watched this film recently. You probably saw my review for it. It was awful. Aside from the really cool design of the characters on the cards, this movie wasn't scary. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was a lot of cheap jump scares. The performances in this were terrible. Some of the worst I've seen in quite some time. The dialogue was just like roll your eyes, nauseating. Like I could not believe some of the moments with these characters in this movie. And yeah, just completely and totally forgettable. Skip over this one. Coming in at number 6 is the film Imaginary, a Blumhouse horror movie that honestly from the trailers I thought would at least be interesting, and it was not. This movie also had really horrible performances. It was not scary. Every moment in this movie that was trying to scare you was a cheapo jump scare that was really poorly put together. Loved where they went in the third act, kind of taking it into this fantasy world, but a lot of the production design was really lazy. The CGI was really bad. There was a couple cool practical effects moments that I appreciated, but like this movie had some of the worst dialogue I've ever heard. Just like expositional dialogue that was completely and totally predictable. Just a really run of the mill bad horror movie that was such a cool concept that could have been something truly special in the hands of a different director. Coming in at number 5 is The Strangers Chapter 1. I just reviewed this movie recently. This movie is terrible. This is a copy and paste replica of the original Strangers movie that just takes away from what made that movie special in the first place. There is no atmosphere or ambiance in this movie. This film has completely unlikable characters that it's really hard to stay invested with them or care when they are in danger because of how poorly written they are. I didn't feel any suspense or anxiety for them because every moment in the original film that was just a camera lingering on something horrific, in this it was just a jump scare cutting to something else. And I'm not sure how they're going to make 3 of these movies because this movie was so bad, and it seems like the reception from audiences alike were that this movie was just really bad. And I don't know how you're going to go about making 2 more of these movies when the first one was so miserable to sit through. Coming in at number 4 is the film Scrambled. This was a comedy drama about this 30-year-old woman who was one of the most unlikable and miserable characters I've ever seen in a movie. Every attempt to have comedy in this film was so forced and uncomfortable. I just kept wanting this thing to end. It was almost an hour and 40 minutes, and it felt like it was 3 hours long. It's been several months since I watched this movie, and I can remember little bits and pieces about it, but I've already forgotten most of it because of how miserable of an experience it was to sit through. I would not recommend this movie to my worst enemy. It was a miserable nightmare to sit through. Coming in at number 3 is the film Killer Body Count. This is a Tubi original movie, and the reason I watched this movie was because the director of this film also directed the Slumber Party Massacre remake, which I genuinely thought was an entertaining and fun movie. This movie sucked. This movie had horrible performances. It had like comedy that was so terrible, that was so forced. And every time one of the comedic scenes happened, I just cringed. The horror elements in this movie were terrible. None of the violence looked realistic. Most of the twists and turns in this were pretty on the nose. Nothing about it was surprising. The only thing that was surprising was how much time I wasted watching this movie. Coming in at number 2 is the film Madam Web, which probably feels like the easiest movie on this list to pick fun at because I'm really burnt out on comic book movies anyway. But this is one of those movies that's like bafflingly bad. Like, how did this even make it out of the studio when in the first 5 minutes there was ADR where the dialogue was not matching up to how the mouths were moving? I was like, this came out of a major studio and they allowed this to hit theaters. There's literally a scene where the lead character's like, well, I'm gonna go leave and go on a side quest now. I'm leaving the rest of you in a different part of the movie. Like, I've never seen that in a movie before where it's just like, I'm gonna go do my own thing and completely just abandon the rest of the plot of the movie so that I can get expositional dialogue about something completely different. The performances in this, as many actresses in this movie that are in this movie that I love. I'm a huge fan of Sydney Sweeney and I love Dakota Johnson. They were so bad in this movie. Both of them were. There wasn't really anything in this movie that was suspenseful or action-packed. I feel like the marketing really led people on to when you saw Sydney Sweeney and the other girls in the group in their like Spider-Woman outfits, because it's literally for a flashback or a flash forward sequence for 10 seconds. Like, it was really disappointing. And I don't really care about the characters in this universe at all, but I feel like building on this world that's literally never going to amount to anything with just a bunch of unlikable characters making really nonsensical decisions. It's just a really baffling movie that honestly I was hoping would be so bad it was good, and it had some moments that it was, but it's never like to the level that I feel like I would recommend you wasting your time whatsoever watching this movie. And number 1, the worst movie I've watched this year without a doubt is the film Founders Day. I watched this movie at an early advanced screening, and oh my God, I wish I never did. This thing was almost 2 hours long and was one of the most predictable, awful, bland horror movies I've ever seen, with some of the most laughably bad performances that you can imagine. But most of all, it was boring. And when a movie is boring, and you're talking to the guy who loves Skinamarink, who loves Perfect Days, who loves Patterson, I love slice of life movies, I love slower paced cinema. This was boring because it had no idea what it wanted to be. It wanted to be Scream in some moments, but it was nowhere near as clever or interesting. I guessed most of the twists and turns in this movie in the first 5 minutes. The way that this thing just slogged in the third act and took forever to just kind of wrap up and end. The most exciting part about this movie, as I said in my review, was I saw someone dump a drink on someone else, and that was the most entertained I was through the entire movie. This is one of the most miserable films I've ever seen. Please, for the love of God, do not waste your time watching this movie. So what are the worst movies you've seen this year? Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear what movies you hated. I always enjoy finding out which movies that I should not waste my time on. As always, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new material and look forward to getting more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.